Hello everyone, welcome to another update for the Server Runtime SEG for the week of the 2nd of November 2022. So this week I've worked more on the custom control plane. There are two key features that have been added this week. So the first is the support for the Devfile standard. So Devfile is a CNCF project which standardizes the way dev environments can be defined. It's still quite nascent. However, what we've done is we've added additional support for the Devfile format. So now instead of just using the experiment YAML file format to describe your environment, you can also describe your environment in the Devfile format. I've also added the ability to use SSH to log into your containers. So earlier you could only use a browser to log into the containers, but now you can access your containers via SSH. So we created a custom proxy to do that, and that has also given us the ability to do authentication and authorization for anything being accessed over SSH. With that, I'd like to get to the demo. All right, so I'm in a repository here where we have a single dev file. So we don't have any experiments YAML in this repository. All we have is a dev file. So I'm going to go ahead and click here to start provisioning the environment. I may have created one previously. So it prompts me whether I want to create a new one, and I do, and so it's going to go ahead and start provisioning. Now let's look at while that's provisioning, let's just look at the dev file or YAML file here. So we've got two components in this dev file, and this is using the standard devfile.io format of provisioning environments, and I've got essentially the runtime, and I've also got a Postgres container running here. So basically, let's say I'm writing code in Node where I want to write some sort of web service and I want to access a database. I also have port 8000 exposed as an endpoint in the dev file format. So the environment's now been provisioned. I can now log into the environment, and as you'll see, it starts a VS Code, and within VS Code we have the environment all set up. So here I can open up my main.js file. I can see my JavaScript code. I can access my dev file. So the first thing I'm going to do is start up a terminal. And within the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and run npm install to actually start installing my dependencies. So now that my dependencies are installed, I can go ahead and run npm start to start the server, right? And because I've got those ports exposed, I can actually access those by just putting the port number here. As you can see, it says hello world, and we're ready, right? I can go ahead and make changes to my code. So I can change this to hello GitLab, and it restarts. So I can go ahead and refresh, and you can see that it says that as well. Now I can go ahead and commit and push my code, and that should be fairly easy. So I can say git add, git commit. Oops, I need to configure email address. Just going to use this kind of default email address here. And I'm going to go ahead, commit and push. So as you can see, I've already authenticated into GitLab, so I can make changes very easily. The next thing I want to show you is that because we had that additional Postgres container running, I can actually connect to a database as well from this container. So I've got a pre-written script which will go ahead, and if I run the node REPL, what the script does essentially, it creates a client connection to my local Postgres running on localhost 5432. It creates a table called test, inserts a single record into that table, and it goes ahead, and I can go ahead and run a query as well. So run a query and get the rows back, right? So because I've got that sidecar defined in my dev file, I can actually access that database alongside my container. Okay, so that's the Devfile support. What I want to show you next is the support for SSH containers. So I'm going to go ahead and go to another repository, and I'm going to go ahead and start provisioning an SSH-based container. So again, need to create a new environment, and here this time when I'm selecting an IDE, instead of selecting VS Code or Emacs, I'm going to go ahead and select the SSH option. So this is going to create a container with SSH enabled. So while that's provisioning, I want to quickly show you what's happening behind the scenes here. So essentially, as a user, I request for provisioning of a container. What the provisioner is now doing is generating a private and public key pair. The private key is sent straight to the IDE, so you can actually download the private key when you access the UI. And then once you have the private key, the user can then download that private key, right? So that you can authenticate. Additionally, what we're also doing is storing the public key in our database, which is Postgres. And then as a user tries to access the IDE via SSH, what we actually do is fetch that public key and validate the key, whether it is correct or not, before we proxy the request. So for this, we had to create a custom SSH proxy. So the environment's now ready. I can go ahead and sign in to GitLab. And as you see, as I've signed in, it's asking me, it's letting me download a private key. And this is a new private key that is generated. So I go ahead and download the key. And then it also gives me the SSH command so that I can actually SSH into this container, right? So I'm going to go ahead to my terminal. And I am going to go and, first of all, I need to change permissions on the key before I can use it. So I'm going to do 400 for the key. And then I can go ahead and run the SSH command, providing the key that I just downloaded. So if I do that, it has now logged me into the container, as you can see. So I can actually, I can now access the container. Now, the cool thing about this is that I can now use this to access IDEs in headless mode. So I can, if I open up VS Code here, and I go ahead and create a new SSH connection, specify a new host, provide my credentials here and hit enter, the same SSH command. And if you see, it's added a new host and I can go ahead and connect to that host. So now instead of actually connecting, accessing the IDE through the browser, I can actually access the IDE using my local IDE, right? So it's opening up the remote, it'll set up the SSH connection, and then in a few seconds, we have connected to the host. So now I'm using my local IDE. I can go ahead and open a folder on the server. So this is that basic Go example. I can actually view my GitLab environment YAML file, which describes the environment like this. I can go ahead and open up a terminal window and run my code as well. So now we have, again, full access to the IDE in headless mode, and that's the sort of power of enabling SSH. We can enable other IDEs using this as well, so we could use any of the JetBrains IDEs, also use SSH to connect to it, so we can enable those IDEs as well. So for next week, I'm going to be focused on more GitLab integration, trying to start the provisioning process. So right now the provisioning process starts with click on the README. What I really want is click on a button in the GitLab UI to start provisioning the whole IDE. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening.